Hi, I'm Constance Brand, and welcome to our EEA Ask an Expert today. Today we are talking about PFAS and mycotoxins. Some complicated terms there, but thankfully we have some experts with us to help us decipher them and get in depth on these issues. Joining us is Magnus and Joanna. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before we start, of course, we're always happy to get your questions and comments, so please put them down in the comment section and we'll make sure we get to them. Magnus, of course, I should also say that we recently published 2 reports on these issues, and we will get the links for you in the comment section. But Magnus, let's start first with PFAS. On PFAS, why is this group of chemicals such a big concern, and what are PFAS polymers?
Okay, so PFAS is a very, very large group of chemicals, so maybe 10,000 different substances. And it has been known for quite a while that some of them are extremely toxic. We've all heard about PFAS and PFOA, I think, where you had a lot of contamination around Europe, drinking water, soil, and so on. And these chemicals are known to be very persistent, so they never break down in the environment, also called forever chemicals for that reason. But some of them are also very toxic, like they can be endocrine disruptors, they can cause cancers, they can affect the immune system. But the thing is, when it comes to toxicity, there is also a large number of these chemicals where we don't know a lot. And in this recent briefing from the EEA, we are zooming in on a number of those chemicals that are known as PFAS polymers, which are perhaps the lesser known forever chemicals, where we don't know that much about the toxicity. And then we try to explain, what are the concerns for this specific group of PFAS compounds.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a little bit the impacts of PFAS in general on the health, but what about polymers? Are they any different to the PFAS polymers?
What sets polymers apart from the other PFAS compounds is that it's large molecules. Think of it as a Lego. Like the normal PFAS would be the individual Lego bricks, and then the polymers would be the entire Lego structure. So they're very large, and when a molecule is very large, it can't get into living cells, and therefore it's sort of non-toxic by itself. But what we look at in the briefing here is that there are actually concerns when you manufacture the polymers. So there you use the smaller Lego bricks to manufacture them, and you've seen all over Europe that you've had releases of PFAS, you had contaminated sites where they manufacture the polymers. And also what happens when these polymers reach the end of their life, they break down, and here they can enter the environment in different ways. And even though they are extremely persistent, they may be slowly degraded over time into smaller molecules that are then more toxic. For example, it could also happen when you incinerate waste. There you need very high temperatures to burn PFAS. But if you only partially burn them down, then you can release a number of compounds that are smaller and toxic. Mm-hmm. So this is actually, you could say, a life cycle assessment of the PFAS polymers.
Right. And you mentioned some of the health impacts. So what about the broader impact on the environment, for instance?
Yeah, the thing is that when polymers are broken down, or when you look at the starting materials used to manufacture the polymers, the smaller compounds, the smaller PFAS compounds, when they enter the environment, they're persistent, but a lot of them can also build up in living organisms, so they are bioaccumulative. And that means that even though you release small amounts, over time they build up and they get into our foods, where they can contaminate also humans that are eating, for example, fish, meat, or vegetables. And then some of them are also very mobile and can leak into the groundwater and thereby contaminate our drinking water.
Okay. And what other forms of PFAS are there out there?
I mean, as I said, there are quite a lot, right? So I mentioned a few like PFAS and PFOA where we know the toxic effects. But then if you look at the degradation products from the polymers, then actually we don't know a lot. So there is one specific substance that has also been mentioned quite a lot recently in the media, which is called trifluoroacetic acid, TFA. which is now found in drinking water almost everywhere. This is a potential breakdown product of the polymers, but it can also come from other sources. For example, breakdown of pesticides or smaller PFAS compounds. And this is one of the, you could say, PFAS that we are also concerned about.
I mean, seem to be talking about the widespread use, but what are they actually used for?
Oh, but it is very widespread.
Yeah.
I mean, it is used virtually everywhere. Of course, in consumer products, where we know them from non-stick surfaces, frying pans, raincoats, and so on. Also, in more ordinary textiles, they can be used. But then they are also used in industrial processes. They're used in electronics, in pesticides, medicines. But also a lot of products that are important for the green transition, for energy storage, and so on. So you could say that there are many uses, and some of them could be easier to get rid of than others.
Okay. So perhaps focusing a little bit on the recent report that we came out with, what are the key takeaways from that report?
When we zoom in on the polymers, the key takeaway is that we need to look at the life cycle. It's not enough just to look at the polymers saying, okay, they are non-toxic because they don't enter living cells. You need to also look at how they are manufactured and what happens at the waste stage when they are broken down.
Okay, great. Joanna, don't worry, we'll get you involved here. And it's like
Finally.
The reason why we have both issues here is because it has the broader umbrella of the One Health approach. And what is the One Health approach? We'll get to that shortly. But again, if you have comments or questions, please get them into our comment section, and hopefully we'll get to them. Now, let's turn to mycotoxins, big term.
Yeah.
What many people may not know what it is, and harmful toxins. Can you explain what they are and what the impact on climate change is?
So mycotoxins are toxic fungi that come from different types of fungi that you can find in nature, and they commonly contaminate crops, but they can also be found in soil and drinking water, and they have because they get through the food chain. They have some serious health effects. They're potential endocrine disruptor, toxic. They are carcinogenic compounds. The issue here and the link, and why we produced this briefing, linking it to climate change, is that fungi thrive in humid and with the increase in temperature due to climate change, we are seeing that in certain areas in Europe, the contamination of mycotoxins is increasing, and we're also seeing some pattern in terms of shifting patterns. So areas where you wouldn't find so many mycotoxins, you are currently finding a bit more, and the predictions is that that will increase.
Okay, and where are these mycotoxins found?
Mainly, you get the exposure mainly through diet, so you can find them in food. But as I mentioned before, you can also find them in drinking water and soil. But the main contamination for us humans is through food. So when you see that food is moldy, throw it away straight away. You don't, if you see that a piece of cheese has a bit of mold, you don't cut off just that piece of cheese because they're spores, so you don't see them. They can be in parts of food where you don't see them, but the food is already contaminated.
And so yes, basically that's how people are exposed to toxins.
Exactly.
Without even knowing it. No. They're inhaling these spores.
Exactly. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
You can also, because you can get contamination also through harvest, so people that work in agriculture, they should also use protective gear when if they suspect that the crops are contaminated. So they can be exposed through that as well, not just by eating it, but by working with food too.
So basically these are found in cereals like corn, maize,
exactly.
Wheat, barley, and the naturally occurring, and then once they're combined or something taken from harvest, they're still alive. Are they still?
Well, you can wash them, but not all mycotoxins. For example, when you cook certain foods, not all mycotoxins are broken down with certain heating. Like if you fry them or if you cook certain foods. So if you suspect, always check the use by date, and you need to have trust your senses as well. If a food has some smell but you can't see anything, just discard of it because you don't know if you're getting exposed or not.
Okay. What are the key conclusions of our work on this, of our recent report?
So we draw the data from a project that has currently finished. It was called HBM4U, the Human Biomonitoring Initiative in Europe, and we analyzed an ensemble of 18 substances and substance groups, one of which was mycotoxins. So we gathered data on human biomonitoring, and just to explain a little bit this big term, human biomonitoring is the internal chemical exposure. So you get exposed through a chemical, through food, the environment, and you have an internal concentration to that chemical that can have some health effects. So we gathered data from 6 different countries, which you can see in the briefing as well. And if memory serves me right, about 4 of them were above, we call it the human biomonitoring guidance value. So this is not a regulatory value, it's a value that was developed in the project and above which you can see some adverse health effects. So we had, in average, about 14% of the population that was analyzed was above this guidance value on mycotoxins, on DON specifically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what are again, to reiterate, what sort of health impacts could we see then if you're above these levels?
Well, you can have liver toxicity. It's a potential carcinogenic as well as endocrine disruptor. So it can mess your metabolisms inside your body, just to speak in lay terms. So it's not something that you want to be exposed to. But there are also regulations in force to protect citizens from this.
And while we're on human biomonitoring, we also included PFAS testing on that, right, too?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and not on the polymers, but on some of the other PFAS compounds. We also have data from human biomonitoring and from exposure of humans in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and now this project is now completed, as you said, and now there's a follow-up project?
Yes, precisely. Now we have a partnership, so it's a much bigger project that lasts for 7 years. It will finish in 2029. We have 1 project or 2 on mycotoxins, but we are also analyzing other compounds like pesticides. PFAS obviously is still a big issue, endocrine disruptors like bisphenols, some heavy metals too. So we have a whole set of chemicals in which we are also doing human biomonitoring at European level. Yes.
Okay, and this involves how many countries?
Altogether, I believe 23.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's yes, and the agency, the European Environment Agency, were part of the management board. EFSA and ECHA, our sister agencies on food and chemicals, are also part of the management board. So there's a very big interest to gather the data and use the data later in our regulatory mandates that the agencies have and the advisory roles that we have as the EEA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great. So now we sort of hinted at the One Health thing.
Yes.
What is it? What is the One Health approach? Do you want to take first stab and then we'll go?
I mean, the One Health approach is basically a better cooperation across different agencies and institutions in the EU on subjects that are cross-cutting, that affects multiple areas, where before it has been much more, I would say, working not in isolation, but perhaps the coordination has happened at later stages. Now it's really the idea is to take this up front and have a more proactive cooperation on these important issues.
Mm-hmm. And for your, maybe I'll get back to you, but for your area, what sort of One Health impacts is this mycotoxins research?
Yes, so there was, I actually, thank you for pointing that out. There was one of the case studies that I mentioned in the briefing where it's a good example of a One Health cycle. So there was a dairy contamination in a dairy farm in Portugal, and so they found mycotoxins in dairy products from the cows that they had. So the whole One Health approach is to think of this triangle of animal, environment, and human exposure, and tackle the issue from there. So we have several agencies involved in the One Health approach. It's us, ECHA, EFSA, the ECDC, EMA, and OSHA, I believe. Maybe I'm missing one, sorry. As Magnus was saying, it's important that we are all connected and that we have these early warning systems also in place, and by talking to each other we know and we can share information on how to tackle a problem with the adequate solution that can suit everyone. Yeah. We are stronger together, right?
Yeah.
So there we go.
And perhaps on PFAS, what sort of cooperative work on this One Health do you do, for instance, with the European Chemicals Agency?
I mean, the European Chemical Agency are in charge of regulating the PFAS compounds, especially in industries and consumer products. So they are working on this big restriction under the EU chemical regulation REACH. But we are also involved with some of the other agencies, like for example EMA, the European Medicine Agency, are responsible for the use in medicines and medical equipment, and here there are some important discussions about if you use PFAS in medicine or in other products that are curing diseases or even life-saving, then it's more difficult, of course, to phase them out. So those are some of the discussions that are being held also between the agencies on how to approach this and where you can sort of do something and where it's more difficult to reduce exposure and release of PFAS.
Okay, great. Again, if you have questions or comments, please get them in. I already have a question here from Mary. What should we as EU citizens be most worried about in the future, PFAS or mycotoxins? Oh, goodness. Well, I don't know if you can...
We'd have to do a risk assessment on that. I think maybe I can just... I think that... so there was one EU regulation that was updated recently in 2023. So some of the values were lowered. So this is something that's in the radar of the European Commission. It's DG Sante's dossier. So they are aware about this exposure, and things are being done in terms of regulatory constraints, let's say, lowering the limits to ensure that citizens and the environment are protected. So as long as you are also careful with what you eat, then hopefully it should be okay.
Yeah, I would say, both are of course concerning, but you can do something about mycotoxins, whereas when you talk PFAS, once a contamination is out there, it's almost irreversible. You have it in your bodies, you have it, it's very costly to clean up, or even impossible in practical terms.
Yeah, so, and perhaps you could say something, since ECHA is working on a paper on this that's coming out on proposal for the European Commission.
Yeah, they are working on this restriction proposal, which is... It's a proposal to phase out a lot of uses and also have some derogations, of course, in areas where it's not possible, where you don't have anything to substitute with, and you still need some functionalities in chemicals. So they are working on this. They have scientific committees that are right now discussing these proposals, and then after they agree, it will then be referred to the Commission, who will then be in charge of actually developing this proposal into something that can be agreed upon in the EU on how to phase out many uses of PFAS.
Yeah, well, we're not a regulator here in Copenhagen, but on mycotoxins, are there any rules in place on this on the EU level, or?
Well, apart from that regulation that I was mentioning, the University of Utrecht, if I'm not mistaken, has this early warning system on mycotoxins, but it's related to animals, so in fish. So there isn't so far there isn't an early warning systems on mycotoxins, but there are limits that are now in force to prevent the contamination of mycotoxins, and that it comes into our food and that it harms our health.
So with the climate change making it worse, was this a more prevalent question in southern parts of Europe than northern Europe before, or?
Yes, so there was a publication by EFSA from a few years ago where they did some modeling, and it was clear that countries like the south of Spain or Italy would be more affected, but they couldn't see they didn't have enough data to see if that would happen in northern countries. So they could not say for sure that Nordic or northern countries in Europe would be more affected, but the southern countries were going to, yes. Okay. So something to bear in mind.
Yeah. Another question from Einar. What about exposure to mold in buildings and facilities? We haven't looked at that per se.
No, that's a different type of mycotoxin. So it's a different type of fungi, sorry. Mycotoxins are mainly through dietary exposure. The mold in buildings, it's a different thing, and I presume it's regulated under a different type of regulation, maybe urban.
Yeah. Sorry, we can't answer that one directly, but again, if you have any questions or comments, do get them in. Time is almost up, but perhaps we can talk a bit about One Health and what further work are we going to do in this area?
I think perhaps with the One Health, we can also tap into different chemical exposure, even using human biomonitoring to. We already have what we call a signal, and we published that in the Zero Pollution monitoring report. And we have some signals on certain chemicals, and there is interest in moving forward with that. So I guess the One Health approach can also be not specifically for the mycotoxins, this was an example, but also for other type of chemicals that you can find in food and the environment and through other sources that can harm your health and the environment and the animals. So this is all a very like a closed loop.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I can see that happening, for example.
Okay. And what other work are we going to do on PFAS here at the agency, at least?
I mean, we already produced 3
Yeah.
briefings quite recently on this. So I would actually say the most important thing that we are doing right now is in connection with a new legislative proposal, which is expected to be adopted very soon. But it contains an early warning and action system for emerging chemical risks. And this is actually a system that will enable Europe to identify and respond faster when we identify chemicals of potential concern, like we've seen for PFAS, but it could also be other types of chemicals that have like similar properties that are coming on the market, and suddenly we realize this is perhaps not so good, we need to do something. So it's a better coordinated way to look at these and respond more quickly to these threats.
I was just going to tap into that. And I think the importance here of human biomonitoring is that it's a mechanism that it will also be part of this upcoming regulation, in which we will have data and we will know the internal chemical exposure in humans, and we will be able to understand through these connections that we'll also have with the research institutions what are the health effects that these chemicals are having in our health and in the environment. Because if we are getting exposed, that means that first they're already happening in the environment, hence our interest as the European Environment Agency.
And are there any safer alternatives to these PFAS type coating chemicals out there already? Or
for many users there are. It's actually some of the work that our colleagues in the European Chemicals Agency are doing right now. They're looking into all the different uses, where do we have safe alternatives and where do we currently lack safe alternatives. So they will do it in a very thorough and specific way for the different uses. But in short, there are a lot of uses where you have safe alternatives. There are also some where you don't.
Yeah. Magnus, I've got some PFAS questions coming in from Arthur. What are some key habits that we could adopt as individuals to lower our exposure to PFAS in our daily lives? How can we reduce our risk?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say it's probably limited what you can do yourself, because most of the PFAS we get through the diet, and it's actually PFAS that has been out there in the environment and then gradually built up. It's not so much actually the exposure from the individual consumer product that you're using that is of concern. But of course you can do something there. I mean, I would say actually that in the EU we have stricter rules than elsewhere. So if you perhaps don't buy from web pages outside of the EU for your kids' toys and stuff like that, because you don't know which chemicals they use.
Sure.
That's one good advice.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Sophie. Why have we waited so long to act on PFAS? Good question.
Yeah.
Probably not one you can answer directly.
It's not something. I mean, I this is something I usually present in an hour or two. So I'm not sure we have time for that, because it's a very interesting story what actually happened. But the first warnings we got on this is 25 years ago, in May 2000. And that was for PFAS. And since then, our knowledge has expanded rapidly. Remember, we're talking 10,000 different substances. So it has not been easy, and there's still a lot of missing information. But I would say that we are reacting as soon as we can, but it's complicated.
There's a lot of, to add, there's a lot of scientific procedures that need to be put in place before something is said for sure that it's harmful or carcinogenic, etc.
That's important to know.
That's very important to know. So you know that when there's a fact-checked scientific paper out, there's this whole review process, and then there's another process by which that feeds into legislation. So once that is approved, then you know that everything else before has been done, and you are sure that that's there to protect environment and health in this specific case.
Sure, it has tremendous implications.
Yes,
So should
and the
diligence.
long chain PFAS have been regulated for longer, right? So there was
I mean, at least like the PFOA and PFAS, PFAS was actually banned in 2006 in the EU, and then it was internationally under the Stockholm Convention in 2009. So I mean, so we know that for a long time, but it's all the other PFAS compounds that we are still struggling with.
Okay. Great. It's your last chance to get your comments or questions in before we wrap it up for today. I would say if there's no further questions, then we will wrap it up. And thank Magnus and Joanna for joining us today. And thank you for taking the time to watch us. And if you have any further comments or questions, please jot them down, and we'll get back to you when we can, for sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.